So after further consideration, these things run into a situation where once you're doing one thing, you might as well do other things because it's all cumulative. And if we've got it apart, we might as well clean this all up, and we're going to change the gears now so that the torque converter works better with a lower gear ratio. And then these will all be cleaned up, everything will be cleaned up, it'll look nicer, and we're going to rip it apart today, clean it all up, and then flush the whole inside with a pressure washer, and that'll be it for today. We'll get all the parts ready so that when these parts show up, we're going to have new axles in here with bearings that are pressed on already, and put the brakes on, and new brake lines.
We had some Prothane leaf spring bushings left over from the bushing kit, and this will be an opportunity to get rid of just one more box. Here's another box of parts we had, miscellaneous brake stuff, and we're going to be able to get rid of all this stuff. We have a couple more boxes for the front, but that'll be another video. I think I'm going to make the gear changes a standalone video, and the rest of this will be on the axle change video. So I did a little research on this rear end, and this shin pack was to provide the proper clearance for the taper roller bearing that lived in here. And I also found out that this rear end came with two different types of carriers, a power lock and a track lock. The power lock being a two-piece like this one, you can see it's bolted together, and being the better of the two. So we're just going to run this carrier, and Paul's just asking, is this carrier going to be good to go from a 287 gear to a 354, what we want to run in it? It sounds like the 273 and down is a different carrier, but this one actually falls in the 308 and up category. So it should accept the new gears. Try and get these springs out now. I got the shackle off, and actually the upper didn't look too bad. It's getting a little out of center there. And it appears that this is all a one-piece type pin. You can see it's spline there. And the upper is actually cupped. Here's the bushing and the spring. It's pretty tore up. So we're trying to get this leaf spring out. We got a situation here at the front eye where the through bolt is seized to the sleeve inside, and we got the sleeve spinning with the bolt in there, but we can't get the spring out because it's all locked in that bracket. So we're just gonna take a Sawzall, see if we can cut it out.
Oh, that's pretty fast.
Hopefully she wiggles out of there now. So close. Here's what was seized on it. We're gonna press all this out and put the polyurethane bushings in anyway. We're gonna wire wheel, sand, and paint these leaf springs. They were still in pretty good shape. Here's the end of the bolt, and we just realized it was a special bolt that was in there. So we'll see if we can get some new ones, or we'll make something. We're gonna clean up the spring pack. I got them all marked which one's facing forward here. Wait, no wonder that was so long. Got the old ball joint press out. Not really sure what's going to happen here. We're just going to shove some crusty washers in here and see if we can push that bushing out now. Boy, took it right on out of there. We're not sure if our new bushings use the sleeve or not. We're going to check that in a minute. Looks like there's a couple different sized bushings on the leaf spring. The front is a little bit bigger than the back, and the bigger of the two bushings is clearly too big for this sleeve. So we're going to take that sleeve out of there and see what happens. This hacksaw's older than dirt. Nice old blade. It would have been a lot easier if I'd cut that all the way through. Oh, it's a tight fit. I think if we polish it, we might be able to get it to go. It'll go with the press.
Right now we're in the process of cleaning up the rear end. A lot of people might think this is overkill, but someday when the car is all finished and somebody's looking over the whole car, instead of looking at a car that's just done and it's working, it's functioning, it's fine, people that are into cars and look at your car and they can tell that you ended up personally getting involved with each piece, like you treat it like a piece of jewelry, and it's been massaged to where it's, you know, a smooth surface. Remember we were at the junkyard and you saw all those pits? We're gonna try using metal etch primer and filling and getting it to look like it's a brand new item, and it should look like the car just came off the assembly line when it was just done. We're just using these flap wheels. And whoever thought of this was a genius, because usually, let's say if you just had one surface of sandpaper and it loaded up with rust or you get it into grease and everything, all of a sudden you'll notice it the next time you use a grinder. Once they're loaded up, you're just like kind of polishing it and just leaving like a smear of grease around it. With flap wheels, it's a bunch of individual little pieces, and as they wear down, you keep on getting new material and they last a lot longer. The torque converter has been returned from Hughes Performance, and they tighten it up. We're getting too much slippage. And upon inspection, after we took it apart, well, first when we first assembled it, there was all kinds of clearance issues that we had this thing custom mated to AMC to Turbo 400. So this torque converter is custom designed and welded with the tabs that match this. This is a new flex plate, and when the engine was internally balanced, they didn't quite get it exact, so they needed to drill holes in here. That could be causing an issue where there's some flex going on, and when this thing's running, we're only probably putting out 450 horsepower, but when you're gassing it and doing a burnout, there must be flex in this metal here. And we could see an imprint where these bolts were just tagging right there. So when this thing is figured out as to how it's going to engage into the back of the crankshaft, this depth of this hub has to be measured just right, so it's not bolting on the transmission and prying against the thrust bearing on your crank. And these pads have to be at the right distance, so these bolts, you can see we have play. There's motion here. And now we got new ARP bolts that are even harder and thinner, that'll give us more clearance so that we don't get, luckily we took it apart when we did to tighten up the torque converter and see how this was or on the originals, it was making contact with the torque converter. And these are all things to consider when you're measuring. Probably when it's just running, everything's fine, but when a load gets put on it, this torque converter can move back and forth because it's just sliding on the splines in the transmission, and this has enough movement where things were tagging each other. So when it comes down to clearances, sometimes just a little bit different. You can see how thick this is, and it's just a stock bolt. They're probably grade 8. When you get ARP bolts, they're even stronger, and you can see the head's going to be thinner. So we're going to have more clearance so that this doesn't end up, when this flexes, tagging the back of the torque converter.
In comparison of the head thickness, we're actually gaining 50 thousandths more clearance with this thinner headed ARP bolt.
This is This is kind of rounded like this, and this is real sharp. So when that thing's flexing, was tagging, you could see it was putting like a groove into the back of the torque converter. Not deep enough to wear through the metal and have oil flinging all over, but you just don't want any stress risers that could, when you're winding out, have the sheet metal of the torque converter start to crack. Anything can happen at high speed, so this is really a improvement with ARP bolts. Originally, when we put this thing together and, assembled something that's not stock, remember we always told you, you change one thing, you got to change 3 others. You can see, and you can't even hear this when the engine's running and you got noise. You'd think we would have heard some screeching noise, but you can tell the bolts that hold the torque converter on were hitting this. It's a plate that goes in between the block and your transmission. And then a dust shield is supposed to be here, and it keeps crap out from getting in between. So our first thing was to just bend this, so it wouldn't catch. Then he faced off the bolts, and now we're thinking about cutting this away so it's not even ever possible to ever make contact. What we could do, we want to leave it stock, but we're going to repaint all this and then run it, and maybe because the ARP bolts are thinner and there might even be more movement, we would see that if the torque converter bolts aren't catching this, if you got paint on here and then all of a sudden you see new shiny metal, then the last ditch effort would be to relieve all this metal. So this is what we did the last time we ended up putting the thing together, and we noticed that that was hitting. We had to put these in the lathe and turn them down, as thin as we felt safe to go. So here's this divider plate in between here. So you're talking, just a small amount. And I don't know if it's normal. I never had a camera underneath looking at a car and seeing how much this could be moving when everything's slinging around really fast. But that divider plate was getting hit. If I had the original flex plate, we could show you, but we ended up chopping it up and making a throwing star. But on the originals, there was like a trough dimpled down that gave it strength. There was a minimal amount of metal on that flex plate, but where the bolts attached, it recessed down so that the heads were below the surface of the rest of it. So no way could the heads of the bolts tag that sheet metal. But now, because this is flush, this sets the head of the bolt, that much higher. So we got it all cleaned up. Some people think you should weld these around here, but you got to get the whole thing heated up, weld it with a decent nickel chrome rod, and keep it all wrapped up and let it cool slowly, and hopefully it doesn't crack. We're thinking of getting a cover that's got a brace. We'll tie up this axle tube a little bit. Anything you can do to make it a little bit stronger. Some people would probably say, with all the money you're sticking into this, why don't you just buy a 9-inch Ford rear end? Well, he wants to keep it all American Motors as much as he can. And those are really expensive, and they require more power to run them. So we're going with this, and we're getting it as clean as we can, making it as strong as we can. That's what it's going to be. And you cannot get these things clean enough. You think you got it clean it more, because any kind of grit that gets in the bearings and stuff is going to chew everything apart. So we're going to be pressure washing it and using hot soapy water. We've got a bristle brush that'll run through the tubes. Anything you can knock loose and blow it out won't get into bearings. The middle of January, it's pretty cold out, and we're using hot water, but the more water we use, the more this place is going to turn into a skating rink, you know, as soon as it gets cold. This is all turning to ice. So you can see it. The more we do it, the more it's going to make a mess. We didn't even get a chance to get to drying this thing off, and you can see how fast cast iron rusts once you got a bare steel. So, I mean, what was it, 2 minutes in water? It's already rusting out. You got to blow this thing out as quick as you can. Alright, it is what it is. We did as much as we could, and that's all you can really do. We should be in a nice warm shop, but we're spraying out in the freezing cold, and now we got to get this thing in without, you know, dropping it or getting our hands on it. But it's best just to keep it from rusting anymore, so we had to put primer on. So this is the end of the day. We finally got the rear end all pressure washed and stuff, and when you're soaking wet in a winter of Wisconsin, it's not cool. And we need the stands to go outside to put this stuff on there, and all it is a bunch of sanding and scraping and getting rust off, and the leaf springs will be all painted black, and that'll make it look good too. Nothing worse than looking underneath and seeing somebody's old rusty parts, you know. There's a trend where guys like patina and they want their car looking all rusty, but if you got it half and half, it just doesn't go. We want to have everything. When somebody looks underneath the car, it looks like, wow, this would be a breeze to work on. You don't even get dirty. And when we watch shows where people have cars in California and down south and you're working on stuff, you just are envious that a car is easy to work on and don't have to deal with rusty bolts and stuff. In Wisconsin, it's just a given. You know, the older the cars, the harder it is to work on. So we want to have this so as you get older in the future, it'll be easier to take it apart and you're not getting all grimed up. So in between here you got plastic, and if you get rid of all the rust and you have new plastic in between there, the leaf springs slide a lot better.